So I think the big picture of this chapter is the yellow fever, but more importantly, the author seems to be tracing the trail of human understanding of the yellow fever and how it evolved from way back, sort of towards the beginning of this chapter, with the sailors just not really knowing what was going on. They knew that you go to certain places, man, like 50% of people are going to die of the yellow fever where and then time kind of went on a little and we saw that yellow fever got introduced to the Caribbean via the slave trade, and the West Africans that were arriving in the Caribbean had a lot of them had already been exposed to yellow fever because it originated in Africa. And so and on top of that, something I learned that was kind of interesting was that humans can be hosts for the yellow fever. And as the mosquitoes uh, suck blood from one person, they then become a vector and hold the disease in them. And then that's how it transfers to other humans and primates, if those are in the equation. And so, anyways, the the people that arrived in the Caribbean had immunity where the colonists really didn't. They were just kind of bouncing around from place to place, and where they came from, they didn't really have issues with yellow fever until they started accumulating in areas near the Caribbean and the Americas for that matter. And as time went on, people started catching on to certain things that would make it worse. Rainfall, uh, times of the year when there was a lot of water, standing water, and especially with the way the plantations were set up, where they were growing rice and sugarcane and stuff that grows in a lot of water or needs a lot of water, so they would make these ditches that held water, and that's where the mosquitoes would breed. They would lay their eggs, and they would just, I can imagine they would be horrible. I've been to places where mosquitoes are bad, and it's because there's water everywhere. And so they were making this big old mess for themselves, essentially. They had brought people over from Africa, and then they were making these farms for the people to work on that is just like a mosquito yellow fever factory, is basically what was going on. And it took a little while before people started catching on, scientifically speaking, to what was actually causing this. They had no conception of insect being an issue in terms of disease. They didn't have microscopes that were powerful enough. So, one of these scientists, this was something I found pretty morbid and interesting at the same time, was this scientist, I can't remember what his name was. He decided to try out a little test, and he put a couple people in one room that was full of crap, literally vomit, clothes with vomit, and all sorts of horrible smelling stuff, I imagine. Uh, Stuff that had been exposed to people who had yellow fever. And then in the room next to them, they had people that just had mosquitoes in there. They didn't have any of the nasty stuff. And it turns out that people in the room with mosquitoes had contracted the yellow fever, and the other people didn't. So that was kind of a turning point in scientific history where people started realizing that, man, it's these mosquitoes. This is the problem, and we are making the problem worse by our farming techniques and having standing water all around our houses and stuff. So after that, people really started cracking down on uh, reducing areas where mosquitoes can breed. And not only that, but they started putting screens on windows. I thought that was pretty interesting. I mean, I never thought of that, but it makes perfect sense. So, yep, yellow fever.